Little woman stands in tears, darker now but very clear. Before her lies the path of old, a road bird behind her moans. I'm always reminded of the wickedness perpetrated by man at this time of year. Somehow, all the slaughter that goes on the moor, I don't like that. If we could stop it through petitions or something, it would be great. I know there is that going on, and I throw myself behind that, definitely. Oh, a bit of sunshine. It has been a bit gloomy this morning, but anyway, I've just come in for a well, I've actually just had some MMS. Anyway, no, you all don't agree with that or necessarily think it's any good, but if it gets rid of parasites, which it's supposed to do, if you do it on a regular basis, you do feel better for it, and I'll certainly, I am a living example of that. If you call this living, yeah, well, it is, yeah. So, turpentine is a good one as well. I've heard. I've never tried it, but and I'm not sure you can actually buy it anymore in this country. All I ever see is turpentine substitute, and that will not be the same thing. Turpentine, of course, comes from is it pine or spruce tree? I'm not quite sure, but it comes from a coniferous tree. Now, just because it's a natural product doesn't mean to say it's harmless, of course. And if you really break it down, everything's natural. Like polyethylene, that has to be natural, because where does it come from? Okay, the process may not be natural, which man puts it through, but all the substances used have to come from nature. I'm sure you've worked that out, but all the plastic that's supposedly floating around in the ocean, I'm not saying that's a good thing at all. Of course not. And all the litter that the tourists seem to leave where I live, that is definitely not a good thing. And I just wonder where the mentality comes from to just be driving along and just to pitch something out the window that you don't no longer need. That is shameful. And also, you can always tell a tourist because they slow down for cattle grids, and probably have never encountered cattle grids before. There are quite a few around these parts, and anybody who drives across them regular, like I do, knows that you have to go at them at a good speed, and then you don't feel the bump. Just think about that. You feel less of the bump at a higher speed, unless it's a particularly sagged one, and there are some like that. But if there's nothing coming, I try and veer to the centre of the road where there's less traffic in the past. Therefore, you get what I mean, I'm sure. But that's just the part of the wonders of living in a picturesque kind of part of the earth, and sparsely populated, yet in the summer months and a bit before and a bit after. Quite heavily populated by people coming to have a look for themselves, and I don't blame them for doing that. I don't actually make any money from tourism, but there are plenty of businesses that rely on that trade, and who am I to say anything about that? But I just wish they wouldn't litter. As long as they close all the gates, don't drop litter, and respect people travelling on the roads. They can drive at 3 miles an hour and look at the view if they like, but I tell you what, just look in your rear view mirror occasionally and let the person with the purple face and shaking the fists behind them pull in and let them past. That would be good. Anyway, I am a bit of a miserable twat actually, but there you go. You can only you've got to live with your own face, haven't you? And everybody gets the face they deserve by the time they're 40. So this is what I've ended up with, and I deserve it. Right. Well, the main topic of conversation has to be, for me at the moment, the talk the line experiment, or whatever it might be called. Like I say, I do watch Globebusters. They always, they're on the way out, I think, but they are they're good to actually keep up with current affairs. So whatever may be happening in the world of the flat Earth realization, they kind of have the fingers on the pulse, and they have to fill 3 hours with something. So they, it's almost as if they're contracted to do this. That's what I've always thought. And they can't. Sometimes they go way over 3 hours, but it's as if they can't actually go under 3 hours. It's as if, and I've often thought that about other content providers. It's almost, well, you could say that about me, I suppose. I usually produce 2 vlogs a week. Not always. But there's nobody on my back saying, "Oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do," I just do it from my own volition, from my my need or want to spread the word. That's all I do this for, really. And it'd be interesting for me if I do live, 20 years from now, to look back and think, well, we all now know that the Earth is not a spinning ball, and I'd like to think that I had a tiny little part in that, or at least I'd be quite proud of the fact that I was one of the people who could see through the bullshit and try to tell others. And that's it. I'm not claiming any moral high ground or anything like that. I feel as though I'm one of the lucky ones who could see through the bullshit. And perhaps the reason is, perhaps, is the fact I don't have a television. I listen to the radio, the news on the radio, occasionally, certainly not every day. And anytime the word global is mentioned, it just reminds me of the total bullshit that they're telling us. In fact, last night they were reliving the some kind of a terrorist attack in London, where the fella got the woman, I think, got thrown off the bridge. Was it Vauxhall Bridge? I don't know which bridge it was. There are many bridges over the Thames. But the one, quite clearly, the mannequin under the bus one, where it was obviously a mannequin under the bus. And there was a politician giving first aid, CPR? Well, I can't remember what it's called. But you know, where you try to revive somebody who's dead or dying. And the paramedics were just standing there watching him do it. Now, in the real world, the paramedics would have said, "Sling it up, mate. We're the professionals. Get out of the fucking way, you idiot." I mean, I'll praise anybody who actually revives, you know, can do that. If there's nobody around who do it for a living. So it's obviously, in my opinion, a fraud, a setup. And the people who give in their testaments, there were a few people, you know, being interviewed, and they just sound like they were reading a script. They didn't sound at all as if they'd actually gone through that experience. So, talk the line. That's what I want to talk about. And of course, talk spelt Q-U-E, not T with the L-K. So, talk the line. Of course, as a builder, I use sets of lines, and to build things in a straight line, you have to use lines. There's no better way. People have used them for centuries, and they still use them now, sets of lines. And so you have a line pin at each end and a line between the pins. And normally you build your corners up first, and the corners are built plumb, and the blocks that are laid on the corners are laid on a level foundation. They're laid level. In fact, if they're not level, they go out of plumb. So it's very important that they're plumb and level. One will follow the other. And then you string a line between the courses, starting at the bottom course, of course, and then lay your blocks between your corners. Remembering there may be door openings, windows, that sort of thing, but you get the general idea. But you get over a certain distance and it is very difficult to get your line taut. And you can tell this by putting your line up and then just looking down it with your eye. The eye is a fantastic tool, and it can detect curve. Now the curve is always down over, unless it's snagged on something. If it's just laid freely out there, it will sag, and you don't have to go very long. The distance hasn't not to be very long before you will detect a sag. Now a little sag, it's kind of accepted, you know, a couple of mil maybe, but you don't really want to go over that because it'll upset your mortar joints. Some will look wider than others, and you want a nice even mortar line. And so what you have to do is support the line in the middle of your block work, and that is, well, we call it a tingle. And you just simply lay a block or a brick in the middle of the run of bricks or blocks. You just simply put your mortar joint down and lay one in the correct bond, and then put a tingle on that. Of course, you've gone by your line, but the line actually will be just below the top of the brick or block. So you get a piece of, well, I used to use cement bags. Just tear a piece of cement bag, a little bit of like brown paper if you like, wrap it round the string line, and then support it with another brick on top of the brick that you've just laid, but don't mortar it on, just lay it on top of the paper and the brick, leaving your line free to move either way. And that should be up to then the rest of the brickwork as you lay it across. And that, over a stretch of just 30 foot, you would definitely need a tingle. You couldn't get your line tight enough to draw out that sag. I always use braided lines. They're very strong. They're very hard wearing. They last for a long time. What you don't want is any knots in your line, because that can slightly skew it. And of course, it's a weak point. Also it can kind of interfere, because you get a knot the same size as the line. It's always going to be bigger, and it might just make the line, as it touched the block, the knot would touch the block and then it would push it out. Oh dear. So I'm very skeptical over a length of over 2 miles whether you could actually pull out the sag in the line. I just have no faith in that. Through my practical experience, I don't think it will work. And that's my 2 penneth. So maybe it's an interesting experiment, but if you think that it's going to prove that we don't live on a spinning ball, that's been done. And who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for yourself? Are you doing it for people like Red's Rhetoric, because they're not going to believe it? Or are you doing it for clicks, views, or I don't know what you're doing it for? We already know that water doesn't curve. So what you're trying to prove is ridiculous. Lines stretched across any distance do curve down over the sag. And there is another phenomena, I can't remember what it's called now, but anything pulled in a straight line, any line pulled tight will form a curve. It's just a fact. So I think you're wasting your time, money, other people's money, and other people's time. So it's unnecessary. We know that water is the ancient leveling tool. We don't need a fucking line over water. I mean, it's crazy. It's mad. Anyway, that's my opinion. Do what you like. Bye.
Goddamn global bastards.
These goddamn globe lion bastards.